Well, thanks so much for joining me today for the 12th and final episode of the second season of the Healthy Skeptic MD podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Hochman. After today's episode, I'm going to take a 2-week vacation and then be right back at it for season 3 of the Healthy Skeptic MD. We're going to continue our focus in season 3 on key common health topics that many of us will need to encounter at one point or another in our lives. And I'm going to do a particular focus on emerging or new health technologies. So topics like gene therapy and new digital health applications, and also some of the new medications and other treatments for diabetes and weight loss. There's a couple important new treatments on the horizon that are worth discussing. But to close out the second season today, by popular demand, I have Dr. Pieter Cohen, an internist, primary care doctor at the Cambridge Health Alliance and Harvard Medical School in Boston. Pieter, you may recognize, was on our first season of The Healthy Skeptic talking about COVID-19 101, the episode is called, where he really goes over the basics. It was one of our most popular episodes, so if you haven't seen it, do check it out. But actually, what Pieter is internationally known for is his work on dietary supplements. And I've been following his work for the last couple decades, and it's really been incredible to see how his work has changed and shaped the way we think about dietary supplements and the regulations that govern their marketing in the United States. So we're going to hear from Pieter today about why the current FDA framework for regulating supplements is inadequate and really represents a public health risk for those of us who buy supplements over the counter. Pieter's also going to talk about some important new work that he has published hot off the press this week about athletic and dietary supplements, which he found contain some very concerning substances that are actually not allowed by existing FDA policy, but yet continue to be marketed. So if you do find today's episode engaging, please do let others know about it. Leave us a review if you have a chance, and make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. This all really helps to get the word out there about the Healthy Skeptic MD. So before we jump into our interview today with Dr. Pieter Cohen, there is one health news item that I first want to touch on, and that is a new Nature paper out this week taking on the big question of how is this pandemic going to end, which is on many of our minds right now. So there's a lot of good news out in the United States right now. The vaccine not only seems to be very effective, but it also seems to be effective at blocking transmission of the virus to other individuals. So this begs the question, is it going to be possible to entirely eliminate the virus? And if not, at least could we achieve herd immunity, which essentially means eliminating community spread of the virus and limiting it to just occasional small outbreaks of infections? Now, based on this new Nature analysis, the answer to this question is probably not, at least not anytime soon. And there's a couple reasons for this. One big one is that, simply put, there's a lot of people who are not going to be getting the vaccine right away. So off the bat, children are not eligible to receive it. Secondly, there's a number of people who are hesitant and are not going to get it right away. And a third big reason is that many other countries are quite behind the United States in distributing the vaccine. So unless we were to entirely close off our borders, there'd likely be a continuous trickle of new infections into the country. Another big reason is the variants. So thank goodness the vaccines seem to be very effective at preventing severe illness from these variants, but they do seem modestly less effective at preventing mild to moderate infections. So for these reasons, according to the Nature paper, it's unlikely, at least anytime soon, that we're going to eliminate the virus or achieve herd immunity. It still is an open question a couple years down the road whether that will be achievable or whether it's also possible that the virus could become endemic like the flu. But this does not mean that we need to remain locked down forever. As Vinay Prasad told us in this podcast a couple episodes ago, the only reason we care about COVID-19 in the first place is because it causes severe illness, and the vaccine is very effective at preventing that. So what this does probably mean is that we may need to adjust our expectations about what is required to return to some sense of normalcy. We may not be able to wait until there's total elimination of the virus or even achievement of herd immunity, but as long as there's widespread vaccination among the most vulnerable that will dramatically reduce the risk of severe illness, my hope is that we will be able to return to some semblance of our normal lives fairly soon. So with that, let's jump into our interview with Dr. Pieter Cohen. Well, we have another repeat offender today on the Healthy Skeptic MD. Happy to welcome my good friend, Dr. Pieter Cohen.
Mike, it's great to be back.
Pieter and I were just chatting before we started recording, and his son is a freshman at University of Wisconsin, and they really get some props for making it work to have in-person college experience. How's Austin doing in college this semester?
Yeah, he's really enjoying himself. Really, he's a happy college kid in COVID. Wisconsin's just done a great job in terms of frequent testing the students, making sure that the testing's mandatory, and they track both whether or not you've been tested in the last few days and if it's negative, of course. And then they use that as like a passport to be able to go in and out of the dorms and move around. So their systems are super impressive to facilitate the kids moving on campus and trying to keep on top of micro outbreaks of COVID this semester.
Well, Pieter is on vacation this week, spring break in Vermont. So following, of course, COVID guidelines and not doing extended travel. But how's the weather up there in Vermont?
Yeah, it's great. Well, one thing that's been, nice about this trip up here is that I'm not quarantined here. So for people who have already been vaccinated, like myself, we can go out. So I was able to go shopping today. Run the errands, take care of everything.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear in the East Coast the weather's getting nicer, and maybe that'll also have some positive effects on the trajectory of this pandemic. So, Pieter, the last time we spoke, we covered COVID, but prior to this pandemic, your expertise was in the area of dietary supplements, and we're going to talk a lot about the work that you've done today. But maybe just as an introduction, what are you talking about when you're referring to supplements? When are supplements appropriate for patients, right? I mean, I imagine you have patients who absolutely need to be on dietary supplements.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. I'm recommending, and as I'm sure you do, supplements to my patients all the time. Vitamins or a particular mineral, a combination, multivitamins, iron. These are things that our patients need when they have deficiencies in various vitamins and minerals. But not only that, there's a lot of ways we use vitamins to prevent problems. Folic acid during pregnancy is a great example. But, the category of supplements is very wide. It ranges from the vitamins and minerals to botanicals to protein powders. It can be extracts of various items, live microorganisms. Live bacteria can be sold as supplements, as a probiotic. So, it's an extremely wide range of products that are sold that way.
Right. Well, originally, when I first heard the term supplements, I mean, I think what immediately comes to my mind are things, natural compounds that our body needs, like iron and B12 and folate, but it sounds like from that description that supplements actually refer to a much broader category of substances.
Yes, it's from our perspective, from the medical perspective, it does seem odd, because if you think about something to supplement the diet, and that's often discussed with supplements, it's like if you're not getting enough iron for your diet, take a supplement. That's really what makes sense to us. So things that are not part of the diet, like, the botanicals like echinacea, it doesn't really fit into that framework. What's challenging about the category is that it lumps so many disparate types of products together. And this creates a big problems because, as you can probably start to appreciate, the regulatory framework that would help us figure out how to safely sell vitamin C might not be the same for an extract of echinacea or a live bacteria, a live microorganism. So you can start seeing challenges when you try to lump all these products together and regulate them the same way.
Okay, so the supplement industry, to go back a little bit in history, has changed a lot over the last several decades. There was a big growth in the 80s and the 90s with the supplement industry. So could you just take us back a little bit and tell us a little bit about how the supplement industry has changed beginning around that time?
Sure. So back in the 80s and 70s, probably most people would have purchased these sort of products that are now called dietary supplements at a local pharmacy, maybe a mom and pop owned local pharmacy. So there might be a large category there. that included botanicals, it might include a bunch of vitamins, but there was a really sea change that occurred in the mid-90s. So initially, the FDA wasn't involved very much at all with the sale of these products. But at least by the 80s, they were beginning to get concerned about some health risks. And one of the areas of concern was with the use of mega dosing of vitamins. So the concern was that it's okay to supplement with a small amount of vitamin, but if you give too much of a vitamin, you could certainly be causing harm. And the FDA was worried that because there became quite a bit of a fad about mega dosing of supplements, that people would be harmed. So they wanted to do something about that problem.
So in the mid-90s, there was a landmark legislation, and it was very well intended, right? I mean, there were these high doses of supplements that were being used, and it made sense that the FDA should step in and start thinking about how to regulate them and ensure consumer safety. So tell us a little bit about what legislation changes occurred in the mid-90s.
Yeah, so what happened was that with the FDA starting to consider regulating these products closer and having what the FDA was basically proposing was that if you had a very high dose of a vitamin, that should be regulated like a prescription drug, not like just be able to sell it over the counter, sell it in pharmacies. And that led to a big backlash. It's hard to tell exactly whether or not how much of the backlash was stirred up by industry interests, people who were selling these products, or consumers themselves, grassroots, who were just concerned that they would lose access to these products. This got a lot of people stirred up, and it became a big movement to basically protect supplements from the FDA. So protect these products and maintain access. So a new law was passed that this movement led to a new law that instead of having the FDA more carefully regulate supplements, it did the opposite. It basically made it crystal clear that the FDA had strict limits about what they could or could not do about these products. And it emphasized access to make sure that these products would be accessible to American consumers. It also put all these products together under one framework. So all that happened in 1994 in the landmark Dietary law signed by President Clinton at the time.
So Dietary continues to be the main regulatory framework that's used to oversee supplements by the FDA. Is that correct? And if so, how has it done over the past few decades?
Right. So it certainly is the law of the land at present. There's been modest tweaks, but fundamentally, the framework that was placed in 1994 is precisely what we have today. There have been many people in the public health sphere that felt like from the moment Dietary was passed, it was inadequate. It overemphasized access at the risk of consumer safety. It wasn't a nice balance. A lot of people felt that way from the start. Nowadays, I really think there's no question. There's consensus among many experts, including from people I talked to at the FDA, people I talked to at industry, and many people in the public health space who feel strongly that because of even if it wasn't due for reform back in 1994, given tremendous changes to the marketplace, tens of thousands of products now being sold as dietary supplements, the internet being able to purchase something with a few clicks of your mouse and tens of thousands of products available. These things, and how new ingredients and new drugs are being introduced into supplements. All these things are night and day different than what was imagined back in 1994, and therefore it's time for reform of the law.
So in terms of that point about new ingredients, can a supplement maker just take a new ingredient, put it in a supplement, and market it to consumers? Is that allowed under Dietary?
Yes. So there's a lot of ways to create a new ingredient, find a new ingredient, and just start marketing it under Dietary. To explain to you a few different ways that you can introduce a new ingredient into supplements. One way is that you do a formal process where you send material to the FDA a few weeks before you're going to sell it, saying, this is the reason why I think this is safe. From our perspective as physicians, we would think that safety for a health product would require clinical testing, large randomized controlled trial, and you learn if something's safe or not. When it comes to this process, under introducing new ingredients under Dietary, it's just a matter of sending articles that could have shown that some scientist sometime gave this ingredient to mice, fed it to mice at high dosages for a month, and the mice had no serious consequences. That might be something that's adequate to submit to the FDA. And then you'd have another line of evidence saying that it's been somewhere in the food supply. So let's say it's an ingredient, a small minor ingredient in asparagus, for example. You can isolate that ingredient, make it synthetically in large amounts, and then put it into a supplement and use the evidence from mice that it's safe in humans. This is really stretching sort of our public health understanding of what's safe, especially for a health product, that people are going to buy to be healthier. So there's rules, but frankly, those rules are often not followed. So even though the barrier of evidence, the amount of evidence, very low to introduce a new ingredient using the official channels, most new ingredients appear in supplements without using any channels, usually by manufacturers just putting the ingredient into the supplement and then sort of finding out if the FDA reacts or says anything to them about it. Unfortunately, that's how most new ingredients seem to be appearing in supplements today.
Well, here's the way I usually explain that to my patients, and tell me if I get it right, that when there's a new supplement that's marketed, for one thing, the bar is very low for that manufacturer to prove to the FDA that it's safe. In fact, the FDA, it's sort of the onus is on the FDA to prove it's not safe rather than vice versa. And secondly, if that substance has been found in a natural product or certainly in a food product, even if it's in a totally different quantity and a totally different formulation, that's another path to allow it to be marketed. But just because it's found in a food product or in nature doesn't mean that in a different formulation or in a different dose that it would be safe. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Mike, that's very fair. I think the key here is dose, to me, because as we know as physicians, almost everything, except for the most extreme poisons in the world, their health, their risks are entirely dependent on dose. And just like you described, the problem is there's nothing about dose in the regulatory framework. So once you have approval one way or another, or you just introduce it into supplements, the manufacturers have interpreted the law, and the FDA hasn't really said anything about this, or at least they haven't enforced this. They might disagree with this opinion, but they haven't actively been engaged to stop this. Is that once someone introduces an ingredient in supplements, then you can add that ingredient any dose, as much dose as you can into a pill. But then there's also many supplements sold as powders. So you can put endless amounts in your scoops of powder supplements. So dose is going to be directly related to safety.
Yeah, that strikes me as totally crazy. I remember I used to have a mentor physician, an attending physician, who used to say even water in the wrong dose can be deadly. If you drink enough water, it can cause electrolyte abnormalities and be deadly. So that seems like a major oversight in the current regulatory framework.
The concept of safety for supplements is not the idea that all this is universally safe. It's just that all of this is transferred to the manufacturer, and the FDA only plays a secondary role. So to understand the difference with prescription drugs, you have the FDA, who the manufacturer produces, generates through research the evidence of safety, and then the FDA has the authority to say yay or nay about whether or not that can go to market. And that's very different than supplements. So supplements, there is a safety provision, and that says that the manufacturer is responsible for safety entirely. And the FDA has to have proven concerns about safety or adulteration to take off the product from the market. What this means is that if you have an ethical manufacturer who is carefully testing everything for safety and basing it on meticulous data and evidence and science, supplements are extremely safe because the manufacturer is ensuring it. But on the other hand, if you have manufacturers who don't care about or don't prioritize consumer safety, then we have a problem here, because the FDA is in the Monday night quarterback role of trying to figure out what's out there and dangerous and then chasing it around in the marketplace to remove it. A very difficult job.
And there's probably a lot of manufacturers that are somewhere in between. They're trying to do the right thing, but they also have financial pressures and marketing pressures, and there really isn't no one looking over their shoulder, as you said, until it's a Monday morning quarterback situation where it's already out there on the market.
Right. I think that's extremely important point, Mike, because if you can imagine the situation, you have a company that wants to do all the careful testing, let's say if they're echinacea, and you have and they invest in the safety testing of their product. Think about the cost of that echinacea compared to the echinacea of a company that just, does whatever. They collect something from a field and they just throw it in a capsule and they start selling it as echinacea. It might be mixed with other weeds or other products, or might have pesticides on it. Obviously, the company that has done no testing and just throwing it in there, and then they can sell their echinacea for a much lower price.
Yeah, based on what you just said, it seems that the ethical companies are the ones at a disadvantage from a marketing standpoint, because it's so much costlier to get safe products to market.
Absolutely. I think that making common sense reform of the law is in many parties' interest right now. But let's say you're not a patient, but you just want to take black cohosh. It's in your interest, too, to make sure that is actually black cohosh and properly prepared in a traditional way when you purchase it. And like you're pointing out, it's also in every ethical manufacturer's interest to ensure that the framework is solid enough to ensure that all companies, it's a level playing field, and all companies need to have the same high basic level of quality and safety.
So you just said something that about black cohosh. If a consumer purchases something that says black cohosh in the label, you seem to imply that may not actually be what's in there. Tell us a little bit about that. I know you've done some research on that in that area.
We're also seeing another problem with the framework, which of DSHEA that regulates supplements that we haven't talked about yet, is about standards. So I think that most consumers who go to buy black cohosh assume that the black cohosh is prepared as an herbalist would prepare it. If they were growing black cohosh in their garden, prepared it traditionally in their, at their home, and then gave it to them. But the fact is that with DSHEA, there's no requirement that the preparation or the extraction method or anything about it, turning the plant into the pills, is standardized.
Along those same lines, some of the marketing claims of these supplements has really caught my attention. I'll see products marketed as helpful with ensuring a healthy weight or enhancing athletic performance. How does DSHEA regulate the marketing claims that supplement makers can make?
So this is a very, very important area to understand. And personally, I think one of the biggest problems with DSHEA from a consumer public health perspective. So for prescription medications, the marketing claims, what you can say your pill does, is clearly defined based on this research you've done and the FDA, and then getting approval from the FDA. So if your pills treat diabetes, then you're getting approval from the FDA that this pill treats diabetes, and that's what you can say. Now, when it comes to supplements, you cannot say your supplement treats a disease or cures anything. So if you said this pill cures diabetes, or this supplement helps manage diabetes, that would not be permitted, because you're making what's called a disease claim. And what they allow is something called a structure function claim. So a structure function claim is when you say something will have some benefit to the structure function of the body. For example, you can say, this pill helps maintain normal sugar levels. Okay, now, if we unpack this a little bit and start to think about it, we're wondering, wait a second. So I can't say that this helps treat diabetes, but I can say this helps maintain normal sugar levels. And of course, everyone with diabetes knows that's what they're trying to do, maintain normal sugar levels. So in other words, it created a loophole here in terms of communicating to the public in a way that doesn't technically say it'll treat a disease, but for all purposes, the consumer is going to assume that it works. That raises yet another issue, which is if manufacturers have the ability to say this helps maintain normal sugar level, what evidence do they have to have on file or submit to the FDA that that's in fact a factual statement? This is where things get really sort of surreal. Here would be adequate data to say something helps maintain sugar levels. Let's say you have an experimental Petri dish of mice cells, or maybe let's imagine like a liver cells from a mouse. And someone did an experiment back in 1985 and found that sprinkling an ingredient on these liver mouse cells decreased production of glucose sugar in this Petri dish. You're good to go in terms of the advertising claim saying that this supplement helps maintain normal sugar levels.
Well, it's these marketing claims that drive me crazy as a primary care doctor, because I have patients who will bring in supplements that they purchased at a nutrition store, and it'll say it enhances sexual function or it helps maintain a normal weight. And exactly as you said, there's no rigorous evidence in the same way that a prescription medication would be held to if it were to make claims like that. And I think it can really mislead patients, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Mike, I think you're 100% right. You know, it's very, frankly, well, one might call it deceptive, except it's totally permitted and legal. That's the problem. So the law, this is not a fault of the manufacturers. They're simply trying to, sell more of their product and do it in a legal way. And unfortunately, the law, the 1994 law, permits these kinds of statements. Now, it also creates another perverse incentive. Let's talk about these claims a little more. Because if you can sell your product as it'll help you lose weight, but there's nothing that you can put in it that's permitted to be sold as a supplement legally that can actually help people lose any sort of significant amount of weight. So you've got a problem there, because how long are people going to take your products when they promise to help you lose weight, but you don't?
And you don't have that effect.
Yeah. So this creates a perverse incentive to then start experimenting with novel ingredients in those products to try to meet your own marketing claims.
And to be clear, that would be illegal if a manufacturer put a synthetic compound, in an attempt to generate weight loss, or would that be legal?
Right. What about you cook something up in the lab? It's never been part of food. It's never been a small ingredient in any food, and you put it in supplements. There's no question that without running that by the FDA, that would not be permitted. And it's probably likely that if you try to run that by the FDA, they would tell you that doesn't count because it's never been in the food supply.
But you've found that sometimes manufacturers do sneak these synthetic compounds into supplements. Tell us a little bit about some of those examples.
Yeah, so I think it's useful to just wind the clock back and talk about something briefly that we haven't yet, which is ephedra. So ephedra is a traditional botanical. It's been used for hundreds, thousands of years. And what happened was when the new law was passed in 1994, ephedra became a very popular ingredient in supplements. It was legal. And it was actually, has some quite strong effects, especially at higher dosages. And the fact of the matter is that it also increased the risk of adverse events like heart attacks and even some sudden deaths were attributed to ephedra. So because of these risks of these ephedra products, eventually, 2004, so 10 years after the law was passed, ephedra was banned. So basically it was like everything else is okay to sell as a dietary supplement, but you can no longer sell the active ingredients in ephedra alkaloids. Now, what happened at that point is when a lot of experimentation began. And people, some manufacturers started coming up with synthetic drugs that at first had some sort of cover story about why they might be found in nature. So a classic example of this is a drug called DMAA. Manufacturers were like, oh, here it is appearing in a plant, and here it is, and we know it's going to be pharmacologically active because it was introduced as a pharmaceutical back in the 1940s. So let's put that into our supplements and see how that goes. So that basically happened, and hundreds of supplements were formulated with this DMAA until the same sort of process happened. There was concern that it's led to strokes, sudden death, and after those cases were discussed with the FDA eventually moved strongly to remove DMAA. But that stimulant is just one of many that we found in dietary supplements.
So it seems like the theme here is that there's a lot of loopholes in DSHEA, and manufacturers have found creative ways to circumvent and take advantage of these loopholes.
Right. Well, Mike, I would say there's two parts of it, though. I think the bar is very low for entry, or extremely low for entry into the market. And there's many loopholes. So they're two separate things, and they're both amplifying one another.
So Peter, when I went to medical school, I didn't know any of this. The only reason I began to learn it is because you were my supervising physician when I was doing my medical training, and you would always be pushing me to ask about supplements, and whenever a patient had a new side effect or symptom, ask the question, could there be a supplement that's triggering this? How did you even begin to start thinking about these questions?
Well, I was really struck early on. Mike, my experience in medical school was the same as yours. Maybe with the exception of talking about some vitamin deficiencies, I had not learned about the great majority of ingredients that are sold as supplements. What drew me to this actually was indirect. It was that my patients whom I were caring for started getting sick and coming to the emergency room, sometimes because they were dehydrated, other times because their heart was racing. And or patients came because they had failed a urine toxicology screen, a drug screen at their work, but they told me, I'm not using any drugs. So I would ask, what are you using? And it turned out that a lot of these patients who were experiencing these adverse events were taking weight loss pills that were being imported from Brazil and being sold in the Boston area to our patients and suffering harm. And I did research on this early on in my career, documenting the harms of these pills and the prevalence of their use. And it was through that research and talking about that research with the community and then more broadly that led to the FDA to contact me. And the FDA said to me, Peter, what you're seeing in these among your patients and these weight loss pills being imported from Brazil is something we're seeing more broadly in weight loss dietary supplements being sold throughout the United States. And that was really the start of this. That was the start of my understanding that what we were seeing with the harm from the weight loss pills from Brazil was very similar to what American consumers throughout the United States are being exposed to.
So I've been fortunate to be following the research you've been doing for the last 15 years or so, and I think your work has really changed our way of thinking about supplements. I think some of the things that you found, for example, are that, as you said, what's on the label is not always what's in the package. You've also highlighted that issue about the low bar for entry. You've identified specific examples of patients who have gotten very sick liver complications, kidney complications, etc., from taking legally marketed over-the-counter supplements. What would you say are some of the big takeaways from the work that you've done over the last 15 or 20 years?
The big takeaway is really what we've been talking about, Mike, which is that we need common sense reform of the law in order to ensure safety. A lot of times I do talk about, and one thing we haven't talked about much today, or we haven't talked about yet, is that the FDA has also, even when they have some enforcement powers, they've taken a lackluster approach to getting the job done.
Is there an example that you could cite where you would have moved faster if you were the FDA?
Back when ephedra was being banned, 2004 range, right after that, a company was like, hey, can we introduce this Dietary, this new stimulant, in a supplement? So they submitted the paperwork to the FDA. And the FDA wrote back and said, no, you can't. It's not permitted supplements, not dietary ingredient. In part because it's not found in plants. Or in the food supply. So the FDA has clarified their position on it. Now, flash forward. So a year ago, the FDA was not only had clarified through their legal channels that this was not a legal supplement ingredient, and an article from the FDA itself comes out demonstrating that it's present, demonstrating that it's synthetic, and that there are health concerns about it. Despite that, radio silence. The FDA has not put out a public warning to warn consumers about this new stimulant. The FDA has not warned manufacturers to reformulate their products without this new stimulant, and it remains readily available. So we are again documenting that stimulant, in this case mixed with many others, in dietary supplements. But that's a perfect example of the FDA not using the enforcement tools that they have.
This new study of weight loss supplements and sports supplements just came out this week, and I think the punchline you just said is you found this ephedra-like compound that's not supposed to be in there, but yet it is. So the FDA, at least historically, has often followed your lead, Pieter, in taking action after one of your studies comes out. What would you hope that they would do in response to these findings?
The micro response is to communicate officially from the FDA that these stimulants are available in supplements, they remain available, and that the FDA uses every bit of their enforcement power to remove them from the market. But that obviously won't stop, a brand new supplement, new ingredient being introduced, next week in place of these. So fundamentally, if the FDA believes that they cannot get control of the marketplace, they need to aggressively be talking to Congress and saying, we do not have the authority that we need, and these are the things we need. So we might need a registry where we know of every single product and every single ingredient that's available on store shelves. And we might need the authority to decide what can be included in the registry and automatically take products out of the registry when we find them to be adulterated or we find them to be a potential health risks. Really, the FDA is not using these enforcement tools that it has. I do appreciate, though, that given how the law is and given that any of these ingredients can be introduced at any time, and other manufacturers, if they move against one ingredient, 10 other manufacturers might introduce 10 other ingredients. They could never possibly catch up with the situation and ensure safety for all consumers unless the law is reformed.
Yeah, it really sounds like a game of whack-a-mole. Just as they put out one fire, there's going to be another issue or another new synthetic compound popping up, and the FDA really does need that authority and resources to keep consumers safe. So Pieter, needless to say, the work you have done has not exactly made you a darling of the supplements industry. In fact, you were sued and had to deal with, unfortunately, a week-long trial where you were sued by $200 million by one of these supplement makers. Tell us about some of the pressure you've gotten from supplement makers, but also do you think that there might be some supplement makers that are trying to do the right thing and do actually appreciate the work that you're doing?
Yes. I think the industry, there's a lot of ethical players in the industry. So there's a lot of people trying to do the right thing and would like to see that all the standardization that all supplements are high quality, that all supplements are accurately labeled. And I see a lot of ability for us to work, those of us who are working in public health, with the industry to come together with solutions that are moving us in the right direction. If a company can make hundreds of millions of dollars selling prohibited stimulants, experimental stimulants that are dangerous to consumers, there is going to be a lot of pressure from those companies, because there's a lot of profit involved in trying to stop research, in trying to stop the FDA, suing the FDA, suing researchers, you name it, to try to continue to make the profit that's currently available, given the framework.
Well, I'm going to post for my listeners, Pieter, an article that was written about the lawsuit that you went through, and we just really appreciate what you've put up with, and being willing to stand up for what you believe in and what's to ensure consumer safety. So you're being modest here, but you really have overcome a lot. But I also hear a hopeful message from you in that there may be an opportunity to put together a coalition of the ethical manufacturers, consumers, and those who are concerned about consumer safety, and advocates, and come together with legislation that will enable us to have supplements in our stores that are safer. So that gets to the last line of questions I want to ask for you, and that's to give advice to listeners who do want to use supplements. So let's start with vitamins or minerals where you have a deficiency. Maybe your doctor's told you you're iron deficient or you need vitamin D. What advice would you give to consumers to make sure that they're getting products that are safe?
My advice I give to my patients is twofold. Usually, to start out with, it's when you're buying a supplement, purchase one with a single ingredient, with very few exceptions, really being multivitamins and calcium and vitamin D. I recommend sticking to a single ingredient. So if you want vitamin D, buy vitamin D. And a lot of these things, when we're seeing the biggest trouble, it's mixtures. It's unknown mixtures of multiple different botanicals, for example, I would avoid. Now, with that said, though, just sticking to something with one ingredient on the label does not ensure that the dose is right, that the preparation is right. So what many of the most ethical manufacturers have done is either in-house or with a third party, had a third party come in and audit the product and the production to make sure that's high quality, or do testing on the final product to make sure it's high quality, or both. Now, when that is done in a very thorough way, we can be assured that what's on the label is what's in the product. And
how would a consumer knows that's happened?
So this is where consumers have to get pretty savvy and take a very close look, a very careful look at the label. But I can give you some examples of high quality, work in that space. That includes U.S. Pharmacopoeia, USP. I collaborate and do a lot of research with NSF International, and they have a really high quality product process to evaluate supplements. Consumer Labs has a different process where they analyze the quality of the products afterwards. So these are, and there's other high quality ones. The problem is the number of high quality processes are way out swamped by a myriad of other, weaker or even bogus programs that claim to do third-party certification, but really just provide a stamp on the label. So consumers really need to dive into the details, understand what does the USP signal, NSF, Consumer Labs, what do these actually look like on the label? So those are two of my tips, which is purchase single ingredient supplements for the most part, and educate yourself about the high quality third-party certifications and make sure that stamp is on the label.
Are there any retailers that help ensure that they only sell products that have good third-party verifiers?
No retailer at present has said it has to be certified only by the highest quality third-party certification programs. The reason is that would grade the percentage of total supplements that are certified by high quality is probably very small. We don't know the percentage, but definitely less than 5%, maybe less than 1% of all brands out there. So if a retailer, again, it's a huge disincentive for a retailer, let's say for Amazon, to say we're going to use these high, USP, for example, and then you have to go through the USP program to sell on our marketplace. That's going to eliminate 99.9% of the market.
Yeah, well, maybe there's a market opportunity for a boutique retailer that could really do that hard work for consumers. But as you said, it does sound like it really limits the number of suppliers that you can get products from. But maybe something like that will emerge. So the very last question I have for you, Peter, and it's actually something I don't think I've ever asked you, so I'm curious myself what your answer is going to be. It's about a multivitamin. Should healthy adults be taking a daily multivitamin?
Should a healthy person who's 100% healthy, no medical conditions, add a multivitamin for extra insurance or to make sure they're not missing anything? I don't see any evidence that that's the case. We have some large randomized trials that show that it's neutral. So it's also not going, what we know is taking an extra multivitamin is not going to harm you. And the overall picture is that in large trials, if you're healthy, you don't need to take a multivitamin. So now I don't recommend for example, for me, I don't take a multivitamin. And for my patients who are healthy or don't have a specific indication for a vitamin or mineral, I don't recommend a multivitamin.
That's pretty similar to the answer that I give my patients. I certainly don't go out of my way to recommend it except in specific circumstances where it's necessary. But if patients do want to take it and they're getting it from a reliable manufacturer, using the criteria that you mentioned before, I don't have a major problem if a patient wants to take it. Well, Peter, this was a great overview of how to think about supplements if you are a consumer. There's so many more issues and details here. I want to ask you about specific ones like omega-3s and vitamin D, and the list goes on. So I'd love to have you back at some point so we can dig into some of those details, but really appreciate your joining me today. If you do find today's episode engaging, please do search and subscribe to The Healthy Skeptic MD wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Consider leaving a review, and please do pass it on to others who might be interested. Have a good week, and we'll pick it up after the break next time.